name's Carissa, and welcome to the channel. This is Boxers and Books, where I talk about all things bookish and share with you my thoughts and feelings on the books that I'm reading or have read. Today we're going to be doing the Fantasy Romance Reader tag, which was created by Hannah Blackwell, and I will link her channel down below, as well as the link to her Discord that she runs with Maggie's Books and stuff. It's called The Hideaway. It's wonderful if you're into fantasy romance in general, reading. Check it out. It's a great place, great people. Yeah. Anyway, today we're going to be doing the tag. Lately, I have been reading more and more fantasy romance. My usual genres were like contemporary or sci-fi fantasy. And then over the past few years, I've gotten more and more into fantasy romance. The fantasy that I would read would have like romantic elements in it, but it wouldn't be like a main focus. Now I'm really liking it where it's a half and half split, or at least close to a half and half split, where it's very fantasy but also very romance. But sometimes I get in the mood for things that are like very romance with like a sprinkle of fantasy. But usually it's in that like happy medium of like 50-50, 60-40, around that range. Anyway, so the first question is, what book got you into fantasy romance for the first time? And this is actually a funny story, and it's the reason for the title of this video, because you probably read the title and you're like, what in the world? So, as a child, I loved reading. I think that goes for a lot of people that are on BookTube. When we're children, we read, and we probably don't have a lot of friends, so we find friends in books. At least that's how it was when I was a kid, because I lived in a neighborhood where there weren't any kids my age really, and I was socially awkward and did not make friends well. So anyway, I was a big reader. So that being said, if I asked for a book, they would get it, you know. And so I was probably in middle school, and I'm not sure about how old I was, but I'm assuming I was probably in like 7th, 8th grade. It could have been 6th, but, you know, probably best guess is like 7th grade. And I was at Walmart with my grandma, and of course we had to stop at the book section, because that's what one does when they're at a store that sells books. And my grandma was a big reader too, so she was like finding books for herself, and I was looking at books, and I found this book. And me being, you know, 10, 11, however old you are in middle school, did not know what this book was. But I saw the cover and I read the back, and it seemed so interesting. It is called Playing with Fire by Gina Showalter, and it sounded so interesting because it was about a girl who was suddenly able to control the 4 elements. And like, I loved Avatar as a kid. I still love Avatar. So like, a girl being able to control all 4 elements, I was like, holy cow. And it was a kind of suspense actiony book, because there's now a government secret agent that's going after her to neutralize her. I didn't know what I was getting into until I started reading it. But when I showed it to my grandma, she didn't like look at the back. She didn't notice the little H in the corner, that telltale H. So she was just like, oh, you want this one? Okay. And so she got it for me. And so I started reading it. And it wasn't until I got into the book and sex started happening that I realized this isn't a book for me. This is not a book that is intended for my age. And I was like, oh, so this is a thing. And so that was kind of my foray into fantasy romance at, 11. um, and so I think I ended up telling my grandma, like, when I was an adult, like, oh yeah, you bought me a smut book when I was like 11. And she was like, what? No, I didn't. And I was like, oh yeah, you did. um, but that was probably the book that got me into fantasy romance, even though I didn't like know it at the time. Um, because now a lot of the books that I read kind of follow that same um premise, not the element thing, but like enemies to lovers and things like that. So, yeah, that's the story of how my grandma bought me my first smut book. And I'm actually going to reread that book at some point. I'm probably going to do like a reading vlog or a review or something of that sort for that book to honor my grandma. I ordered it yesterday on Abe Books, and I got like the exact cover that I had when I was a kid, which is the cover that you've seen on the screen. So I'm looking forward to it. From what I've seen on like reviews and stuff, it's not a good book. um but the memory is there, and I think that will push the enjoyment. Second question is, if you could pick one fantasy world to move to for the rest of your life, which world would you move to? So, if you watched my last video, you probably already know the answer to this question, but it's definitely Orthros from the Blood Gray series. The Hesperines are like the most amazing vampires I think that I've seen in books. Like their connection to nature and magic and how they value like literature and intellect and stained glass of all things and stuff like that. Like they're just so gentle and kind that I'm like, I would fit in. My soft cinnamon roll self would fit in so well there. So and plus it's cold. Like I live in Vegas. It's hot pretty much all the time. Um so I would very much like a place where it's cold. So I would definitely go to Orthros. All right. So the third question is, if you could marry one bookish hero or heroine, who would it be? And it took me a minute to think about this question, um, because you know some of the characters that I've read from, like, yeah, they're badass and alpha male and stuff like that, protective, which is great. But when I really thought about like what I would want to deal with for the rest of my life, I came up with I think it's Asos or Essos from the King's Game. Now I haven't finished this book. In fact, I'm still actually pretty early in. I think I'm only like 15-16% into the book. I stopped it to save it for the romance readathon that's happening in August, which is run by Maggie's Books and Stuff. And I need a light read to read once school starts, where I can kind of, speed through it or get through it quicker than, say, like Blood Mercy, or currently I'm reading Blood Solace, which is the second book in the Blood Gray series. And that takes a little bit more time to read because it's a high fantasy, whereas like the contemporary ish kind of fantasies I can read a little faster. So, anyhow, Asos or Essos is our Hades in the King's Game, and it's a Hades and Persephone retelling that meets the selection. So basically, what happens in the book, and the whole premise, so it's not a spoiler, is that this group of girls is on a bus on the way to, I believe, Santa Monica, and their bus gets a flat suddenly and it spins out of control and it goes over the guardrail and everybody dies. And so they are in the underworld, but they don't know they're in the underworld. And our main guy, Asos or Essos, who is the Hades character, tells them you have a choice. You can either move on to the afterlife and see all the loved ones that you have that have passed and live your afterlife and be at peace and all that stuff, or you can compete to be the queen of the underworld. And so that would be his wife and all that stuff, the Persephone. So I love me some Hades. I definitely would love to be his queen. But moreover, Asos is very like, he's a soft Hades from what I've seen so far. Now that could change. He could have some like alpha protective side to him and things like that. But from what I've seen, he's very like caring about, people that have passed. Um, the main character was really cold and could not get warm, and so he just kind of like twisted his wrist and like used his magic to warm her up without her knowing. And then when he was telling the girls that they've passed away, he was like tearing up. So he seems like my kind of guy. And he's Hades. So, all right. The next question is, if you could be one fantasy creature or magical being, what would you be? And I would like to be someone with magical abilities, like the ability to cast spells or make potions or, control shadows or the elements or something like that, something with magic. And I promise that I'm not going to answer Blood Mercy for every single question. But like the Hesperenes can do all that. Like they're blood drinkers, but like they once they find their grace, they like only drink from their grace, and they can do magic and things like that, and they're immortal. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds, to be honest. Um but if I couldn't be a Hesperine like vampire, then I'd probably want to be like a Grace from um the Malice series by Heather Walter. Probably like a Malice type Grace, a dark Grace. But, a Hesperine would be pretty cool. Not gonna lie. If you could kill one fantasy romance character off, who would it be? And this one would be Gabriel from A Kingdom of Shadows and Stars. Stars and Shadows. I get the two mixed up. I haven't finished this book, and I really should get back to it, but it was just kind of too much at the time. Not like in terms of like, oh, it's too sexy. It was just kind of like, really. For me, like the writing and stuff, it wasn't my favorite. But it was something that I was able to read very quickly, so I got like 67% of the way through, and then I put it down. But I had bought it physically because the cover is gorgeous. So at some point I'll go back and finish it because I don't have that much left to go. But anyway, there's this scene in the book where the queen, which is his mother, and him do something to our female main character Adara, and just after that scene, death would be far too good for him. So, what fantasy romance character do you truly believe would be your IRL best friend? That's our next question. And I had to look up his name because I could not remember because it's been a while since I read the book. But Hadriel from A Ruin of Roses by K.F. Breen, 100% would be my best friend. He's funny, he's pessimistic, and he's a furry. He's in this like subsect group that like gets misjudged a lot. I feel like we would connect. Being someone who is on the ACE spectrum, we get misjudged a lot. Oh, it's just a hormone imbalance. Oh, you just haven't found the right person. All that stuff. And like furries, everybody comes up with a bunch of stuff about furries. So I feel like we would kind of get each other with the whole being misjudged thing. Plus the fact that he's like hilarious. Honestly, best thing. I need to reread the first book and continue the series just for him, to be honest. So our next question is, what would your fantasy weapon of choice be? And so I was thinking about this, and my first instinct would be dagger, because, I mean, you can get some really pretty daggers. But the more I thought about it, when you kill somebody with a dagger, stabbing them, it's very personal. Like, you feel the life draining out of them because you're physically stabbing them. And plus you're like in their face, so you see the light drain from their eyes. It's too personal, and I think it would mess with my head too much. Not that like killing somebody wouldn't already mess with my head, but I think it would do it more if I had to like physically feel it and physically cause it. So I would probably want to do a magic or a poison, where they're gonna die, but I don't have to physically feel it, and I don't have to necessarily be around when it happens either. I can just like poison their food and then bounce. So the next question is, who is the sexiest fantasy romance character of all time? Now, this one isn't a specific character, but I do have one as a runner-up if I had to pick one. But my answer is Hades. So, just Hades in general. Because every Hades and Persephone retelling that I've read, I've really enjoyed Hades. The next question, the answer is actually a Hades and Persephone retelling, where I hated Persephone, but I loved Hades. He's just the OG bad boy villain and the misunderstood man and all this stuff. Like, so the dark and brooding guy. So I would definitely pick Hades because that's kind of my type, which is weird because my runner-up is so not that type. But Hades. Pick one fantasy romance book to burn. Without a doubt, it would be A Touch of Darkness, and solely because of Persephone. She is so immature, so annoying, so dumb, while trying to be like, not like other girls, because my magic doesn't work, and things like that. And my mom, doesn't understand me, and all that stuff. And so, like, while I could tell that the book was very well researched in terms of, like, the Greek myth side of things, it just wasn't good character wise for me, and the writing was bad. I didn't like it. Like, Hades was the highlight of the book, and then I read A Game of Fate, which is his perspective on the first book, and I liked that one a lot better because you got more of like Hades' side of things, like the side stories that involved him that didn't involve Persephone. So I enjoyed his part, but I hated A Touch of Darkness. The only reason it got 2 stars is because of Hades. And because it was like compulsively readable because of how bad it was. And I was listening to it on audio, so like I could force myself to get through it. The next to last question. You can choose one fantasy romance book, and it's the only book that you'll be able to read like ever again. What is it? And so there are a few that I could choose from. The ones that come to mind are like Rhapsodic, Blood Mercy, Hell, A Ruin of Roses. Like, I could read those probably again and again and enjoy them. But the one that I'm gonna say is Playing with Fire by Gina Showalter. I don't know how good this book holds up. It might suck, but because it's connected to my grandma, I feel like if I could only read one book for the rest of my life, that is what I would pick, because it would have that memory of her connected to it. And I mean, I enjoy a good hate read. So even if it's bad, like I can hate on it and find some enjoyment and make jokes out of it and things like that. So I think I could make it work. But definitely because of the personal connection, that's the one I would choose. And then our last question is if you could recommend one fantasy romance book to a reader that was new to the genre and wanted to try it out, what book would it be? So I think that would depend on what genre you're coming from, and what you are interested in and can handle in a book. So, like for example, I really enjoyed Rhapsodic. I thought it was very readable. I didn't want to put it down. It was very good for what it was, by Laura Thalassa, but it does deal with topics of sexual assault and abuse and things of that nature, and some forced things happen later on in the book as well, with some darker themes. So it's not going to be for everybody, but if you read darker books already and can handle themes like that, then I would definitely recommend that one because it's pretty good. If you like historical romances and you like gay stuff, I would recommend Spellbound by Ali Theron. It's a male paranormal romance that deals with a boy, a man who's a reader, so he can like touch an object and see like the history and things of that with that object. And he ends up falling in love with this guy as they try to save the world. And it's set in 1925 New York. So it's very interesting, very good. And there's this scene where Rory, who's our reader, has never had a drink before, and he tells Arthur that he drinks all the time. And so he just keeps drinking and drinking and drinking, and he gets very drunk, and they have to deal with it in the car ride home. And it's very funny. So if you like historical romances, you like LGBT characters in your books, and you like magic and end of the world, like gotta save the world stories, definitely check out Spellbound. It's really good. But anyway, that is the end of the tag. I answered all the questions. Leave me some comments down below what some of your answers to the questions would be. If you don't want to leave a comment on what your answers would be, you can leave a purple heart just to let me know you got to the bottom or to the end of the video. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. I'd love to have you here, and please give the video a like if you liked it. I will see you next time. Bye.